In August 2025, Indonesia's vibrant democracy is put to the ultimate test. Years of simmering economic hardship and public frustration over political corruption boil over when news of lavish government stipends emerges. But the true catalyst for a national crisis isn't just a scandal, it's a tragedy. During a protest, a young, innocent food delivery driver is crushed by an armored vehicle. The unprovoked death of Afan Kurniawan becomes a symbol for a generation's rage, igniting a wave of protests that sweep the nation. From peaceful demonstrations to fiery riots, Indonesia is pushed to the brink, its future hanging in the balance. Indonesia, a nation of over 17,000 islands and home to 270 million people, has long prided itself on its young yet vibrant democracy. After emerging from the shadow of the Suharto dictatorship in 1998, Indonesians believed they had entered a new era, one of greater transparency, fairness, and a louder voice for the people. But 3 decades later, the cracks in that belief were becoming painfully clear. In the summer of 2025, Indonesia's economy fell into hardship. The price of rice, the most essential staple, rose by nearly 40% compared to the previous year. The rupiah steadily lost value against the US dollar, causing import costs to skyrocket. While the urban working class struggled to afford their next meal and pay their bills, the press unexpectedly exposed a shocking truth. Members of parliament were receiving a housing allowance of up to 50 million rupiah per month, dozens of times the average worker's salary, and more than the annual income of millions of the country's poor. This news was the final straw. On social media, people called the politicians modern-day royalty and parasites living off the people's sweat. Satirical videos spread like wildfire. Images of lavish parliamentary banquets were spliced with scenes of ordinary citizens lining up for food aid. But in the early days, the outrage remained confined to the internet, a storm of words that had yet to manifest as a real-life one. On the night of August 28th, fate ignited the crisis. Near the parliamentary building in Jakarta, a group of students and online delivery drivers gathered to protest. They held up signs and chanted, "Justice for the people, abolish the parliamentary allowance." The atmosphere was initially peaceful, much like many other rallies, but gradually, tensions escalated. Riot police formed a barricade, their eyes full of suspicion as a cold command blared from loudspeakers, "Disperse immediately." On a nearby street corner, Afan Kurniawan, a 21-year-old food delivery driver, was on his way to pick up a late order. He carried no sign and wasn't part of the protest. People said he was just passing by. But as the crowd surged, an armored vehicle rushed forward. The engine roared, and its giant steel wheels crushed everything in their path. In the chaos, Afan fell. Screams filled the air. Just a few seconds later, the young man's life was extinguished beneath the military vehicle's wheels. Phones had managed to capture the moment. The clip was uploaded to TikTok, X, and Instagram. Within an hour, it had hundreds of thousands of views. A new hashtag was born, #JusticeForAfan. From an accidental death, Afan became a symbol. The next morning, Afan's funeral turned into a massive march. Hundreds of ojol, or motorcycle taxi drivers in their green jackets, formed a long procession, escorting his coffin through the streets of Jakarta. People lining the streets stood in silence, raising their fists, many of them in tears. A funeral became a street protest. A personal death was transformed into a collective banner. Within 24 hours, over 1 million posts mentioned Afan. People shared his life story. A poor young man who dropped out of school early to help his family, riding his motorbike through the bustling streets every day. They called him the ordinary hero, someone who didn't choose to be a symbol, but was thrust into that role by fate. Unverified clips also surfaced, further fueling the outrage.
There were rumors that, besides Offen, several other victims were also run over by armored cars, but their deaths were covered up. There were fake videos of police officers laughing after a vehicle ran over a person. Truth and lies became intertwined, but the emotion of anger had spiraled out of control. To stem the flow of information, TikTok, under government pressure, announced it would temporarily suspend its live streaming feature in Indonesia. But the decision only made people more suspicious. Was the government trying to hide the truth? Meanwhile, videos continued to spread on YouTube, Facebook, and through thousands of personal accounts. In the streets, protests spread. From a small group in Jakarta, within just 2 days, tens of thousands of people flooded squares in Surabaya, Yogyakarta, Bandung, and Semarang. Students were the vanguard, followed by online delivery drivers, workers, and even disgruntled small business owners. A sea of people chanted, "Justice for Offen," and "Down with corruption." The death of an ordinary young man had ignited an extraordinary fury. And this was only the opening chapter of the tragedy that the entire nation of Indonesia was about to face.
Jakarta, in the last days of August, was no longer the bustling capital it once was. Streets near the Parliament building were packed with protesters. Initially, they carried candles and flowers to mourn Offen. But within hours, the flowers were on the ground, replaced by rocks, bottles, and gasoline in plastic containers. The atmosphere of grief turned into one of rage. Riot police set up steel barricades, their shields gleaming in the streetlights. A loudspeaker shrieked, "Disperse! This is the final warning!" But the crowd did not retreat. Their chants blended together, thundering like thunder. "Justice for Offen! Abolish the allowance! Down with corruption!" Each chant was live-streamed by thousands of phones, followed by hundreds of thousands of people online. A student from the University of Indonesia, his face glistening with sweat, shouted into the camera, "We are not just here for Offen. We are here for an entire forgotten generation. They sit in that building, enjoying privileges paid for by our taxes. Enough is enough." His words were shared over 2 million times in just 24 hours. Social media had turned spontaneous declarations into a guiding light for the movement. After just one night, the movement spread beyond Jakarta. In Surabaya, thousands of students gathered in front of City Hall. In Yogyakarta, the cultural capital, people held a march carrying red and white flags, not in celebration, but in mourning. In Bandung, a convoy of thousands of online delivery drivers rumbled through the streets, honking their horns, forming a human torrent. The hashtags Justice for Offen, Tolak Tunjangan DPR, Reject the Parliamentary Allowance, and Reformasi Polisi, Police Reform, climbed to the top of global trending lists. Indonesia became the center of attention on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Some personal YouTube channels, which previously only had a few thousand followers, now had 500,000 people watching live. However, as the outrage exploded, the ghost of misinformation also appeared. An AI-edited clip went viral, a scene of another armored vehicle running over multiple people on the same night. In reality, the video was stitched together from various sources, but in the chaos, few people cared. Another rumor spread. Jakarta has been completely sealed off. The military is preparing for a coup. All of it was unverified, but it contributed to the suffocating atmosphere. TikTok, under immense pressure, disabled its live streaming function across all of Indonesia. But people quickly switched to YouTube and Facebook. What the government wanted to block only ended up spreading more intensely. On August 31st, in the city of Makassar, a major economic gateway on Sulawesi Island, the anger reached its peak. Thousands of people surrounded the regional council building. At first, they were just shouting, throwing rocks and breaking windows. But then a flame erupted from a corner of the main entrance. No one knew who lit the fire first. Some said it was a student, Others were certain it was an infiltrator. But within minutes, the roaring fire consumed the entire building. Dense black smoke billowed into the sky. People inside screamed, many trying to climb over balconies. Some jumped, hitting the concrete, blood staining the streets. The scene was broadcast live on television, turning it into a haunting image for the whole country. When the fire was extinguished, 3 bodies were found, along with dozens of injured. Many believed the number of victims was higher, but was concealed to prevent panic. Makassar instantly became a terrifying symbol, from peaceful protest to deadly riot.
The news from Makassar added fuel to the fire in Jakarta. In the capital, crowds swarmed the private residences of officials. The finance minister's mansion was looted, and several luxury cars were set ablaze. People talked amongst themselves. If even the minister isn't safe, who is? In the first 3 days of September, the police released a cold number. Over 1,200 people arrested, nearly 500 injured. Independent media claimed that the true numbers were much higher. International human rights organizations spoke out in unison. Amnesty International issued a statement. Indonesia must exercise restraint. Afan's death needs to be investigated transparently. The government cannot answer anger with violence. The financial markets reacted violently. The Jakarta Stock Exchange Index dropped more than 3.6% in a single day. The rupiah fell to its lowest level in 6 months. Foreign investors worried that the instability would be prolonged. Businesses complained. Goods couldn't circulate, and many ports temporarily ceased operations because of striking workers and blocked streets. Experts warned, if the situation didn't stabilize soon, Indonesia could face a full-blown crisis, both political and economic. On September 1, President Prabowo Subianto appeared on national television. He had canceled his trip to China to handle the crisis. Dressed in a black suit, his voice was somber and resolute. He acknowledged, the people's discontent is justified. The parliamentary allowance was a mistake. He announced the complete cancellation of all housing allowances and banned unnecessary foreign trips for members of parliament. He also pledged to establish an independent investigative commission into Afan's death and temporarily suspended 7 police officers involved. But in the same speech, he called those who committed arson traitors and warned he would crush them at all costs. His words were a double-edged sword. To some, it was necessary decisiveness. To others, it was a sign that the government was prioritizing security over justice. In the streets, reactions were split. One part of the population calmed down, seeing the cancellation of the allowance as their first victory. But students and other social groups declared, we are not satisfied yet. This is just the beginning. We want police reform. We want budget transparency. We want true justice. In Makassar, the fire had been extinguished, but its aftermath was still haunting. The families of the 3 victims of the fire sobbed in front of cameras. Who was responsible for the death of my child? No one had an answer. The movement was no longer just about an allowance. It had become a powerful wave, carrying millions of pent-up resentments within Indonesian society. After the fiery night in Makassar, the atmosphere across Indonesia was suffocating. The people, the press, the government, everyone understood that the situation had gone beyond a protest and had become a national riot. Major newspapers ran headlines. Is Indonesia on the brink of 1998 again? A reference to the bloody memory of the student movement that toppled Suharto after 30 years in power. President Prabowo Subianto and his cabinet stood at a historical crossroads. Either concede to appease or crack down hard to restore order. Ultimately, he chose both. Partial concession, but also an unprecedented security clampdown. On September 2nd, the parliament held an emergency session. Faced with the furious wave of protests, the members of parliament, who were the epicenter of the anger, were forced to vote to abolish all housing allowances.